Welcome to a very special edition of Globewatch with me, Charles Ebuni. The Zika virus threatens most of Latin America. Boko Haram and Al-Qaeda threatens Africa. ISIS threatens the Middle East. The Donald Trump effect is putting America at a very difficult corner. Politically, Europe is under stress because of the migrant crisis. Most of the major parts of the world, including Asia, where the Chinese economic bubble is pranking the economy, gives everybody the general impression that we are in a sick world. But there are glimmers of hope, and global leaders across the world are seeking for solutions on how to make the world a better place. My guest today has been one of the towering figures of our current political environment. He was the former Prime Minister of Portugal and the former President of the European Union Commission, serving today as a senior lecturer of international politics at Harvard University. Can Joseph Manuel Barroso make statements that can make you rethink the way we manage the world? The former Prime Minister of Portugal and former President of the European Union Commission, José Manuel Barroso, thank you very much indeed for accepting our invitation on Globewatch.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
You just heard me enumerating a series of problems facing the world today. According to you, which is the most dangerous?
The biggest and most dangerous problem is always the threat of war. War can be devastating, killing millions of people. And we still have some situations of war in some parts of the world, not so bad as it was in the 20th century. People tend to forget. In the 20th century, the two world wars that started in Europe were by far the most devastating in mankind's history. But we have today a proliferation of conflicts that can bring new wars and very much suffering. Look at the situation in Syria, not only for the Syrian people, but also the consequences it has been bringing to the region, Middle East, but also to Europe, for instance.
You just mentioned the Syrian crisis, which has been going for long now as one of the fallouts of the Arab Spring, which was celebrated by many across the world. Why do you think that it is practically very, very difficult, and you sat in some of those meetings to provide a solution for the Syrian problem? Why is it so difficult for the Russians and the Americans to come to a consensus with the Europeans?
First of all, the problem itself is in Syria. It's the Syrians that are not agreeing on the future of their country. And we have their dictator that was trying to destroy part of his own people. But the reality is that there was not sufficient agreement on the other forces to replace him.
Is it wrong to have a dictatorship governing people? Is it wrong?
Of course it is. If that dictator destroys its own people, he has used chemical weapons.
But you know that Libya was under a dictator like Gaddafi, and there was stability. We know that there was stability in Egypt under a dictator. But today, all those dictators have gone. You may call them benevolent dictators, but you see the situation has not been good under democratic conditions.
I cannot call benevolent dictators those who use weapons against their own people. Let's not forget that Gaddafi was using the worst kind of attacks against people in Benghazi. There was a genocide going on there. I understand what you say, and you are right. Sometimes, after a dictator collapse, we have chaos, and chaotic situations are not good. They are awful. What's happening today in Syria, what's happening in Libya. But that is not a reason for us to accept dictators that are destroying their own people. And the problem in Syria starts there. Now, as you were saying rightly, unfortunately, there was not an agreement in the Security Council because the United States and Russia, two permanent members of the Security Council, had different views on what to do with Syria. And that is one of the reasons why the international community is paralyzed.
They have a different view of how to handle the situation, simply because today the Russians have said that never in the history of mankind shall we support the Europeans and the Americans again in any interventionist policy that will lead to a chaotic situation. And they always refer to the Libyan situation, where Muammar Gaddafi was taken out, and the outcome has been the acceleration of the Islamic State. There was a brutal removal of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. And all of these, they say that it is a joint action of the European and American politicians. And you are part of that leadership.
I think this is unfair. In fact, the situation was not created by Europe or by the United States. I don't speak on behalf of the United States. But the situation was not created in Europe. What does Europe want? Europe wants stability. We have no interest at all in confusion in our borders. The reality is that Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. Saddam Hussein was launching a war against his own people. Gaddafi also was launching a war against his own people. Yes, afterwards there were foreign interventions, and sometimes, we have to be honest about it, the results were not the ones we were expecting. Having said that, I think it is unfair and not correct to put the blame on Europe. The blame has to be put on the dictators that has created those situations.
But Barack Obama says that the worst part of his legacy was the failure to provide a plan B after the departure of Muammar Gaddafi. And this issue is stressing Europe today because it has created the migrant situation. Do you regret, as president of the European Union Commission then, for engaging in a military operation without a plan B? Do you say today, I am sorry for not having a plan B?
I don't have to speak about that because it was not the European Commission responsibility. The European Commission has no military powers. I was not part on that decision.
You backed the no-fly zone, right?
No, yes, because I'm against dictatorship and I'm against those who try to destroy their own people. Having said that, I think there were some mistakes, and Barack Obama very honestly recognizes them in a recent interview he made. In fact, there were some hesitations. There was not always a coherent position of the Americans and of the Europeans. Having said that, I want to make it clear. The European intervention was to try to bring stability to that part of Africa. It was to defend the people that were running the risk of a genocide in Benghazi and part of Libya. The intentions were good, and those who created the problem were the dictators, not the Europeans. That is important.
I just wonder how those who watch television today will consume the message you are just sending across, because Libya today is a completely broke down society. And they say that before the departure of Muammar Gaddafi, the situation was better. The former president of the African Union Commission, Jean Ping, told Stephen Saka of Hard Talk BBC, who equally interviewed you, that he warned you guys, Europeans, that please, we can provide a political solution to the Libyan crisis, and you guys refused. Why?
I'm not aware about that. I've not followed this directly. I'm not aware of any kind of appeal of this gentleman about intervention, another kind of intervention. I think the Europeans have worked for a stability and peace in our neighborhood. One thing I can tell you, the European Union is very much interested in stability, because now we are suffering the consequences of that instability. What is the interest of Europe? Do you think the interest of Europe is to have war in Libya? What does Europe gain with that? Europe wants the southern Mediterranean to be living in peace and stability. Now, don't put the blame on Europe of everything that happens in the world. That is not fair. Put the blame on Gaddafi, because Gaddafi, not only before he was supporting terrorism, afterwards he was trying to become again a very good friend of the West. I was in many meetings with him.
Well,
But afterwards, he was destroying his own people.
You just said that Europe needs stability, and we have the migrant crisis. According to the International Organization of Migration, says that plus 1 million people have entered the European space this year, escaping wars in Syria, in Libya, in Afghanistan, and Somalia. Do you think the current European Union response to the migrant situation encourages stability and peace?
I think, first of all, the crisis was not created by Europe. Second, European Union is a victim of that situation.
You know what some people will tell you? That the migrant crisis has been created by European wars of democracy in some countries, and the failure to implant democracies in those countries had led to chaotic scenes.
Look, I was in Zaatari camp in Jordan. I spoke with the Syrian refugees, people like you and me, that were living a complete normal life, and their towns were destroyed, some of them by chemical weapons, by the dictator Assad. Do you think it's fair to say it's a fault of Europe? Come on. Come on, let's be realistic.
But those chemical weapons are produced in some laboratories in Europe.
Let's be honest. Europe intervened afterwards. And by the way, Europe did not intervene enough. It was a dictator. His name is Assad. And he tried to destroy everybody that was opposing him. He has used chemical weapons against his own people. I spoke with the refugees in Zaatari camp in Jordan. Families, young girls, doctors, mayors of their cities. And you say it's fault of Europe? I mean, come on, that's ridiculous. Europe is not perfect. Europe has made many mistakes all over its history. Many mistakes. But we have to be just in the analysis of the situation. If not, we are not going to correct it.
And what is the just analysis?
The just analysis is that we have situations that are very complex in the Middle East, based on factionalism, the Sunni against the Shiites, a lot of hate, also Israel against the Palestinians, Palestinians against Israel, Iran against Saudi Arabia. This is the reality. And there's a problem there. And what happens is that the other powers of the world, including the Europeans and the Americans and others, have not yet been able to establish peace there. One thing I've learned during my life of political experience is that from the outside it's very difficult to impose peace when the parties themselves are not ready for peace. And that's unfortunately my analysis. You know, I've been a mediator in many conflicts. I was the person who made the first meeting between the MPLA and UNITA in Angola to bring peace to that country. I know very well. There was a basic condition that they accept to work for peace. And even afterwards, unfortunately, one of the parties was not respecting the agreement. But you see, and my opinion is in that region, they are not yet really working for peace.
The European construction, which began just after World War II, to be more precise, with people like Churchill, with people like Spaak, with people like others in France. You can quote Charles de Gaulle, who wanted the kind of European family. Today simply is quite divided. The British are saying that we should leave and there will be a referendum next June 23. What is your take on Brexit exit?
My dear friend, it depends on the way you look at it.
But you know, I'm a journalist, I'm not a politician, so
no,
it's practically very difficult for us to be friends.
You have the right, no, my friend, I'm saying it because I like discussing with you.
Okay.
I hope you not consider it an offense.
No, absolutely, okay. Absolutely,
no,
Mr. President.
I said my friend because I like to discuss with you, okay?
Absolutely.
No, and there is no irony there.
Sure,
it's because I like to discuss with you. Now, if you look at Europe, you may look at, look at half a glass of water if it is half full or half empty. Of course, the European Union is not a country. We are not United States of America, we are not China, we are not Russia, we are not Cameroon. But if you compare European Union with any group of countries in the world, it is by far the biggest ever successful project of regional integration. Okay, now we have an issue with some British want to leave. Let's see. Now it's for we are a democracy. Nobody is in the European Union. Let me just say this point. Nobody is in the European Union against its will. We are not the Soviet Union. If Britain wants to leave, they are free to leave.
Mr. President,
but that's for them to decide.
For the sake of European unity, and when you look at the issues at stake, Do you stand by the words of Shinzo Abe, the Japanese Prime Minister? Do you stand by the words of Christine Lagarde? Do you stand by the words of Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England? Do you stand by the words of Barack Obama that a departure of the United Kingdom from the European Union will be a political and economic disaster?
Of course, I said it with all respect for all those persons you mentioned. I said it before them. I've been saying it before them. I think it's a disaster for Britain, but also for Europe.
Who stands to lose more from
I
that?
mean, both. I don't like this issue about who stands more. I think it's bad. For Europe, it's bad because Britain is a very important country. It's the 5th biggest economy in the world. It's a permanent member of the Security Council. It's a country with a great international network. But for Britain also, I mean, let's just think about this. With China, with 1.3 billion people, even the biggest countries of Europe, with 60 million, will not have the same capacity to discuss. As Europeans we have, it's a very important power, Europe. We are an important power. We are not completely integrated like the United States or like China, but we are, in economic terms, the biggest bloc in the world, the biggest trade bloc in the world, with a lot of good things to do.
You just spoke about the biggest trading bloc in the world, but you know that currently there is what they call the TTP, the Atlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which is between...
I launched it with President Obama, so I know about it.
Which
I launched negotiations.
Yeah, to a kind of economic NATO, if you like.
No.
The discussions are in a limbo for the moment. Do you think it is going to be realistic? If it doesn't work under Barack Obama is leaving a few months from now?
I think it will work. Because
is it going to work under a presidency like Donald Trump?
Come on, Trump was not yet elected.
This is presumption. This is politics of procrastination.
Are you going to vote for him?
I'm a Cameroonian, so I cannot practice American politics.
You will not vote for him, would you? It's important. Because, you know, the African American will not vote for him. Because, unfortunately, he's playing with division of ethnic people in that country, the great American country. And he's using this difference, including in ethnic terms.
Well, how do you look the future of the transatlantic partnership?
Now, regarding the TTIP, I'm proud to have launched official negotiations together with President Obama. I've done it on behalf of the European Union in a meeting in the margin of a G8 meeting in Britain. I think it's very important because the European Union-American relationship in terms of trade and investment is very important, and it's good to have as much as possible the same standards so that our companies can go there without difficulties, the American companies can come to Europe without difficulties. So it will be a great support for growth in both parts of the Atlantic, and also for global growth, because these are two of the most important economies in the world. Today, the most important economies of the world are Europe, United States, and China. And so if these economies go up, this can also bring more trade, more investment, more markets. And so I'm in favor of TTIP. Now, I know the objections that exist in Europe and in the United States, but I believe in the end, there will be an agreement.
Do you think that those who oppose the argument, especially from the European perspective, on standards, on environmental fears, because the European market is purely protectionist with over 500 million people, do you think that they have a tangible argument to present that let us oppose this deal?
They have not a real argument. In fact, it's very much a politicized argument against the United States, because we have done more or less the same kind of agreement with South Korea, it's working well, with Canada, and they did not object. But now they object to the United States because it is the United States. So it's very much a politicized argument. I believe it makes sense from an economic point of view to have this kind of agreement.
There is an avalanche of Islamic State with gruesome murders across the world. The center of the European institutions, Brussels, was just recently under attacks. We saw what happened in Paris. We know what happens in Kolofata, in Maiduguri in Nigeria, in Baidoa in Somalia, and Palmyra in Syria. What is the best way out globally to put such extremist views?
I think we need a global I think we need a global fight against them, starting with the Muslim countries. The most affected countries are the Muslim countries. Of course, when there is an attack in Paris or in Brussels, everybody speaks about it. But every day, many Muslims in the Muslim countries are dying because of those terrorists. So I think it is very important that the Muslim countries themselves, they take the lead.
You know, that international coalition exists. That international cooperation. When you look at ISIS, for example, you have 60 countries committed in quenching their situation. But what is missing? What is the missing line? What is the missing principle? Cameroon, Nigeria, they are cooperating. The entire European Union have a common anti-terrorism policy.
Has to do
Where
more.
is the missing line?
It's a recent phenomenon, completely new. It's, as far as I know, the first time a terrorist group claims statehood. They say they are a state, they want to be a state. It's completely against the humanity principles. They are destroying human lives. I mean, people that are watching a football game, people that are in a discotheque, innocent people. I think it's a crime against humanity. And we should have a real coalition of everybody in the world, starting with the most affected countries. And the most affected countries are the Muslim countries, because those guys want to make so-called caliphate and so on. And then, of course, we should support from the European side and the West. But I think we should avoid a mistake we have done in the past. You see, I also recognize mistakes. It is to
What is that mistake?
No, the mistake was when the Americans and sometimes the Europeans were themselves trying to appear as themselves being responsible for the response to all these attacks against them in Iraq or in other situations. I believe the experience has shown that the response to those terrorists has to come from within those societies.
We are just coming from an anti-global corruption meeting or conference in London, and the latest European Union Commission report stated that plus 990 billion euros are lost each year by the European Union Commission to corruption. And one key factor in sponsoring terrorism has been corruption through what you can say issues like the Panama Papers and whatsoever. What is Europe doing particularly to stop corruption?
Look, Europe is fighting against corruption. Of course, corruption, let's be also honest about it, wherever there is a lot of money and public money, there is always someone who tries to get the hands on that money. And Europe has also responsibilities on corruption, including corruption in Africa. I've been always saying it. Where there is someone corrupted, is that there is a corruptor. Corruption is not only one person, or one government, or one party. There is someone who is receiving illegal money from someone who is giving illegal money, you see? So Europe has also its responsibilities. But once again, let's be objective and let's be honest.
You see, you have sat through so many meetings across the world. Like I said in the beginning, you are one of the most powerful figures of our generation. The last meeting for the invasion of Iraq, you hosted British Prime Minister Tony Blair, American President George Walker Bush, Spanish Prime Minister Maria in the Azores. When you look at the situation in Iraq today with the growth of ISIS, and Tony Blair has not ruled the fact that the 2003 invasion is partly responsible. Are you guilty, and will you say, I am sorry?
What I can say is the following. I was Prime Minister of Portugal. Portugal has one neighbor, Spain. Portugal has one ally that is the oldest ally, Britain. Portugal has one strong ally, is the biggest ally, the United States. Those three countries, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Spain, asked me as Prime Minister of Portugal to have a meeting in the Azores to discuss Iraq. And I said, I agree if there is a final opportunity for peace. And I've said it in the meeting, as a final opportunity for peace. I was never in favor of war. I was saying to the Americans, let's try to avoid war. But I also said, if there is war between the United States and Saddam, we are not neutral. We are loyal to our allies. That's what I have done.
Do you feel any
No.
sense of guilt or responsibility
No, I want to not to avoid your question. I think today I would not have done the same. But today I have information I did not have at that time. Because at that time I was told there were weapons of mass destruction. I received that information, and apparently it was not true. And I was told that everything was organized afterwards for the post-invasion, and apparently things were not prepared. So, in retrospect, I would not have done the same. But you know, in political terms, when we decide, and sometimes it's very difficult to decide, we have to decide with the information we have at that moment, not retroactive, in retrospect, you see? And so that's the most honest answer I can give you. Today, I would not have taken the same decision. At that time, I took that decision in good faith because I'm against dictatorships, I'm loyal to my partners and to the countries friend of mine, and that is the reason why I took that decision, and I take full responsibility for it.
The former Prime Minister of Portugal, the former President of the European Union Commission, Jose Manuel Barroso, thank you very much indeed for being guest on Globewatch. And I equally want to thank the Presidency of the Republic of Cameroon that enabled this interview to take place. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.